All right. Hi, I'm Harry, and I'm here to refute Caroline's claim that taxing unhealthy foods will encourage healthy eating habits for lower-income families. She had two main claims, and those were that healthy foods are more expensive than unhealthy foods, and that food stamps make it nearly impossible for healthy eating. Now, her first claim that healthy foods are more expensive is generally more of a fact and not really a claim that's taking a side against what she's arguing about. But she goes on to elaborate in her speech, and she goes on to talk about the true claim that she's actually contesting is that unhealthy food would be bought less if it was more expensive than healthy food. To support this, she cites a 20-year-old study that tracked increases in prices and related to consumption and see if there was a trend there. And while there was a specific trend that was discovered, the data used did not really show a clear cause and effect relationship between the rise in food prices and the consumption of unhealthy foods. Also, the research done was fairly smaller scale, and it was more of a to show the broader relationship rather than finding a direct link. And then the data goes on to suggest. The data goes on to write that if food prices rise at a specific number, say like 18%, then that would actually help decrease unhealthy food consumption. But however, that is a hypothetical and is not really rooted in real life statistics, which makes the claim a little bit weaker. And it also doesn't consider any other factors that could affect this, maybe public reaction or what decisions that people will make based on that change. It's also unclear what the tax is actually on. The advocate only mentions unhealthy foods, but she doesn't mention specifically what, if it's either snacks or nutrients, and each of those has its own set of problems that need to be addressed. And finally, I would like to present a counterclaim. This is from a study done by the U.S. National Library of Medicine, and they tested the same claim and found that small taxes or subsidies are not likely to produce significant changes in BMI or obesity prevalence. While it could change, it could affect it slightly, there won't be any noticeable major differences. Her second claim was that food stamps make it nearly impossible for healthy eating. And she uses a celebrity article to prove this claim. And this article is about how a celebrity tried to live on food stamps for a week to see how it is. And this, while it's a nice experiment, I guess, it's not really reliable, as even the article itself calls the experiment unrealistic, as an average person on food stamps wouldn't buy the exact same things that the celebrity bought. And also the article mentions multiple other factors that affect healthy food consumptions, like unpredictable schedules from lower-income families or lack of grocery stores and supermarkets, and fails to address those factors that could actually really affect the result that is being told. And one of her there was another subclaim in this main claim, which was that lower-income families do not have enough funds to afford healthy food. That this was supported by an ABC News article that showed that lower-income families had to pay nearly like 40 to 70% of their budget to meet dietary standards that are set by the National Dietary Association. And this research that only concludes that these lower-income families can meet the guidelines and not necessarily relates to the main argument that the tax will affect anything. And even though the issue of unhealthy eating habits is worsened in poorer areas, it's shown that the issue of not having fruits and vegetables is not a direct effect that comes from income inequality, as there are other factors that, like I mentioned, that could affect it. And also, a recent study done by the Center for Disease Control found that just 12% of Americans eat the minimum daily fruit recommendation, and only 9% consume the minimum daily vegetable recommendation. So this shows that it's not just the income that, it's not just the income level that affects how people, what dietary standards people follow or not. And it fails to address these other contributing factors and leads to the conclusion without proper warrant. And that's it. Thank you.
Okay, shorter setup. We get to the main point right away. The first point, you kind of challenged the research that the advocate's using, suggesting that some of it's a little bit old, that there might have been problems with the scale of the study. There's no details on your criticisms. I think that's a little bit problematic. I think they're generic criticisms that haven't got any basis either from the research that the advocate cited or your independent research discovering these particular problems. You, in essence, suggest that one part of the quote is a hypothetical. It's not a hypothetical, it's a conditional statement. If this were the situation, then this would be the consequence. We talked about hypothetical or conditional syllogisms before. So it's not the same thing as a hypothetical. It is, in essence, saying under these conditions, this would be the result. So I thought that press seemed a little unnecessary. The argument that says that we don't really know what it is that would be taxed and how that would work. I think that's a reasonable press. The advocate, of course, is not advocating a policy per se, but one of the things that makes arguing for a policy is a lack of specificity on what it is that the tax would consist of. We're going to tax unhealthy foods. Well, who decides what an unhealthy food is and who decides what the tax rate is? That seems to be a little bit problematic, and that would be one of those things that would be necessary to know about the result. They're just talking, the data that was talked about earlier talked about increased costs, but you can increase the cost of a lot of things artificially. The notion that that's going to solve the problems, I think, is more problematic. And in fact, you had good evidence to suggest that there are a lot of other factors involved, and that it's although there might be some change, it's not likely to have any significance. That was the best piece of evidence that you had in your argument. On the second point, you criticized the evidence that's being used, based on the celebrity experience, which I appreciate. That was fine. The data about how much people have to use who are low income in order to meet the nutritional requirements, that's okay. By the way, that's another one of those things that comes up whenever people talk about food stamps. Food stamps is supplemental. It's not supposed to replace all of your spending, so it's supposed to assist people. I don't know what Gwyneth Paltrow is trying to do, get by on the food stamp allocation, because that's not what everybody else does. That's a little weird, but that's a little strange. The argument that I thought worked the best for you, that also contained an element of the problem, is that nobody is eating at these rates that are necessary for healthy living. Only 12% eat the fruit requirement, only 9% eat the vegetable requirement, and that's of everybody, not just poor people. And so the notion that that's going to change people's behaviors, I think there's a huge presupposition here that people will, they'll eat their carrots and their spinach instead of eating potato chips. That's a huge assumption that's being made by the advocates on this side. And I thought that was a good press. All right, thank you.